Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, and I really appreciate you tuning in to listen to another episode of the Art of Procurement. And today I have one more interview in the series of 5 that I recorded back in early May at the Cooper Inspire conference in San Francisco. And my guest on the show today is Mike Jacobs. Mike is the Chief Procurement Officer for Staples. Mike has significant experience both on the practitioner side, but also as a consultant and a leader in Procurement BPO, or Procurement Outsourcing. Mike's led the sourcing and supply chain practices for A.T. Kearney in Northern Europe. He was based in London, I think it was for 8 years. Also for PRTM Management Consultants, and then for Alex Partners. Mike's also previously led the sourcing and category management business for Accenture's Procurement BPO practice, and has served as an acting CPO through his roles in Procurement BPO and consulting for companies such as Best Buy and Kodak. So in our discussion today, Mike and I focus on how procurement departments, procurement leaders can use third parties and outsourcing when building their procurement delivery model. It's an approach that Mike has taken at Staples, and with his Accenture experience, he's worked on both sides of the table. We talk about the use cases and the different delivery models for procurement outsourcing, and also critical success factors. We also go into a little bit more detail about what procurement professionals can do to really embrace procurement outsourcing or the use of third-party procurement service providers if their organization is going down that route. You know, how do you make sure that it's a positive thing rather than look at it negatively? Okay, finally, before we go into the show, I wanted to just let you know that I published a new report recently called 50 Lessons from 50 Shows. In the report, I share 50 different lessons that I learned when I talk to thought leaders over the first 50 episodes of The Art of Procurement. It's been the most popular report that I've put together so far, that I've published so far. And if you haven't got yourself a copy already, you can do so just by heading on over to artofprocurement.com/50 lessons. That's artofprocurement.com/50 lessons. All right then, well, enough from me. Let's get straight into the interview. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of The Art of Procurement. And today, I'm really honored to welcome Mike Jacobs. Mike is the Chief Procurement Officer of Staples. So, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Philip. Glad to be here.
Thanks. And I gave a rundown of your background in the introduction to the show. So I just love to jump into the first question that I ask a lot of guests on The Art of Procurement. And that's, how did you get into the profession? Is it something that chose you, or were you one of the few that actually sought out procurement?
I suppose it was fairly serendipitous. So I was a management consultant coming out of business school, and I worked for A.T. Kearney Management Consultants, which was one of the leading operations strategy firms at the time. And so I was doing a wide variety of projects and stumbled into a project on procurement best practices benchmarking.
Right.
And it was the first ever that Kearney had done cross-industry. And there started to be a lot of demand internally for the results of that study, so went on several projects to take that. And then got assigned to a few sourcing projects, and that was in the early 90s when A.T. Kearney really became a leader in the sourcing field, and so was assigned to the team that commercialized that product, and it just sort of took off from there.
Right. Once you get in it, it's hard to get back out of it. I guess you get the bug.
You do, and it was really funny too, because as I became more specialized in it and then started running practices around it, many of the young consultants would say, well, I don't want to do another sourcing project ever again, and if you make me do it, I'll quit. And then eventually they ended up quitting during the dot-com days and went to a procurement startup.
Right. So they stayed in the profession.
They did.
So given your experience across a variety of different roles in procurement, what would you say the health of the profession is right now? Are we in a good place, or do we have a lot of challenges ahead of us?
Well, I think we're in an excellent place. I mean, if you look back over the I don't know, 2 decades that I've been in this profession, I think we in the consulting world help to professionalize the profession quite a lot. And so you see people in the chief procurement officer seat now who are tremendously experienced, wide variety of experience, and not just lifer procurement people, but placed there from different functions. And then you also see chief procurement officers who go on to other C-level roles as well. So I think it's still a great place to be.
And I was going to ask about that. Do you see more and more procurement leaders then moving into other functions in the company? It's not that this is a silo, and when you reach the top of the silo, you don't have any options to move sideways. Are you seeing that change?
Yeah, definitely so. Definitely so, yes.
So with that being said, do you think that we're making inroads in terms of bringing more to the table than just cost savings?
Well, it's certainly always my aim and my vision. And if you look at what we're doing at Staples right now, it's a kind of a multi-year transformation. And the first phase of it was really based on building capability and driving a lot of savings, and essentially establishing credibility and our presence in the business. The second phase, and the reason why I'm here at the Coupa conference, is really to get the transactional side sorted and to be able to shape the demand with the stakeholders and further improve penetration. But then the third phase, and there are pieces of it we already have in place, but the third phase is really how do I then use this capability that I built for the benefit of the broader business. And so there are already many examples where my people have brought some innovative supply arrangements to bear for the businesses that we're actually using to enhance revenues.
Right. And does that change the perception then inside of Staples on the procurement function from being one that is only focused about cost than to one that's focused on helping them achieve what the needs of their
helping the business, exactly. And even on the cost side, I mean, we've been through at Staples a bit of a reinvention. We had a large $1 billion or so cost reduction takeout program, and that money was funneled into new projects, expanding offerings, adding salespeople, adding e-commerce capability. So something as boring as savings actually is very, very strategic.
Right. So and I imagine that you had to be successful in doing this, in turning it from being procurement going and knocking down the door of stakeholders to stakeholders recognizing they need to use you, to want to use you. How were you able to kind of change from it being procurement-led to the business needing you?
Well, they did need us because of the large cost reduction program. And what I always like to look for as a change agent with a bit of a procurement specialty is I look for the trigger points. And the trigger point for Staples when I joined was we did have this need for large cost reduction to fuel the growth initiatives. And there was a program, cross-function and cross-business, that I just naturally became part of.
Right.
And so each of the businesses had a large target, and they really needed my team to help. Now, the challenge always is to match supply and demand, right? So I didn't have the capability on board right away. So I did have a consultant team with me initially, and that helped drive some of the initial good savings and credibility. And then along the way, I'm adding my own capability and bringing some outsourced capability as well.
And do you feel that there always has to be a burning platform to be able to get the funds needed to invest in a transformation program like that, or can it be something that's more organic, where you see a need from within and kind of push it on your executives?
I may not be right in this, but I personally think there has to be a burning platform, or there has to be some trigger point. Whether that's, we have a profitability issue, there's a, big merger, there's a divestiture, whatever it is, there needs to be. And I think I was pretty fortunate looking back on it because, and I've actually thought about this, if I'd just been hired as the CPO, I don't have a consulting team, I don't have the ability to go hire people, I don't have an outsource partner to help me. I'm not sure, I'd be able to do it on my own.
It needs an event almost to compel the leaders to act, or for them to understand the value that you can bring in the investment you need to make in the capability.
And to get the funding, right. Because a lot of times the consultants will say, well, if you only spend X million on me, the return on investment is 10 times that or 20 times on that. But the reality is getting those few million to invest is very difficult.
And you're competing against a lot of different people who are also probably saying the same thing to the CFO or the CEO.
And not just for dollars, but for time and attention and resources as well, yes.
So what I wanted to do today was really talk a little bit more about procurement outsourcing or procurement as a service, or whatever words we want to use as we kind of evolve the concept of using third parties to support really the delivery model in procurement. Based on the experience, you've worked on both sides of the table now as a practitioner, but also as a service provider. I was interested, first and foremost, well, let's just take a step back. For those who aren't familiar with procurement outsourcing, what are the typical types of activities that, as a CPO, you can consider outsourcing to a third party?
Well, the way I think about it in broad terms, and you're probably more an expert at this than I, but what I see is you either think about a series of point solutions to help you with things, ranging from spend analysis to market research to collaborative sourcing to getting somebody to do auctions for you. I mean, go through the whole range of the sourcing process, and I'm actually overwhelmed every week with the number of single point solution providers who are sending me emails, right? And I don't even know how I would sort through all of that. Yeah. The other end of the spectrum where I tend to gravitate is, a partner that can help me in a combined or hybrid model between my people and their people do a better job. Yeah. And so I went through and if you back up a little bit, I mean, my situation at Staples was, we have $3 billion of global spend, $2 billion or so in North America. My team that I inherited was looking at about $400 million of that, and they were looking at it on a very transactional basis, putting contracts together, basically. So I needed to get some quick capability in there and get a category-based organization. I knew that was going to take a while. But also, I think that if you think about the value of how you generate value in sourcing and procurement, it's maybe half technical and it's half stakeholder relationships, stakeholder intimacy, and therefore I don't believe in a model, as some in the industry have tried to do, which is essentially lift and shift. Take your whole operation, rebadge them, bring new people in, try to do things offshore and whatnot. So where we didn't have penetration in marketing, supply chain, all these areas, I knew you need to have an expert, you need to have intimacy. So I found an outsourced partner after a pretty rigorous selection process. I'm using a firm headquartered out of the UK called Proxima. Yeah. And Proxima was pretty flexible with me in actually adapting a model to my particular needs, and we really created this together. And so I talk about it as a hybrid model, where essentially at the tip of the spear in all of the categories, I have my people. They're the category directors with expertise in marketing, supply chain, IT, etc. And then Proxima supports me on sort of the top end and the bottom end. On the bottom end, what they essentially do is relieve the sourcing category directors and managers from a lot of the burden of sourcing. So the market research, the analytics, turning the crank on the auctions. And so they can do that in a little bit more of a factory mode. Yep. At the top end, they have experts in these categories as well because they have multiple clients and they're in the marketplace all the time. And so on more of an ad hoc basis, I'll bring them in on the top end for the expertise. And then the third way is just for variable resource because you can't ever have exactly the right number that you need. So they provide variable resource. And I've been able to do that, in a construct where where it works in my operating budget. And I know a lot of the outsourcers, at least initially, would talk about, hire us, but you can pay for us out of the savings. Right. And, it's a big ROI. But I found that really, if I'm going to do this long term and have a sustainable model, I really need to look at my operating budget and be able to carve out a piece of that makes sense for the outsourcer.
And does I got a bunch of questions there, but one just on that last point. If you're incenting the outsourcer based on a savings, like a cost savings model solely, does that drive the wrong behaviors from them then in terms of how they support you and wanting to build a capability that is sustainable?
Yeah. Well, as a consultant, I've done probably 20 contingency sorts of deals. As a CPO, I've done a few, and I don't recommend them.
Right.
Quite frankly, I don't recommend them because I think they incentivize entirely the wrong behavior. Yep. And for me, in all of the categories of spend, I have a couple of trusted partners. And in terms of running my operation, I have a couple of trusted partners. And, if you think you need a gain share or contingency sort of relationship in order to incentivize somebody, they're the wrong partner.
Right.
Is sort of my belief.
No, I strongly agree with that because right. I think it just drives you to consider short-term gains over long-term relationships, over long-term kind of sustainability of a program. Right. And ultimately the savings that may be claimed aren't real savings anyway.
Well, that's exactly the case. And then prior to my arrival, we had been operating without a CPO for about 6 or 9 months, and there was a consultant who was helping that CPO, and they were operating on a contingent agreement, and it just fell apart. Claims of cost avoidance, right. or they start pushing on opportunities that the business really wasn't ready to go pursue for one good reason or another.
But the way they're incented kind of compels them to go and do it.
Yeah, they're pushing and knocking
right.
on the door, and I take. I'm persistent, but not aggressive.
Right.
In pursuing those opportunities.
You mentioned part of your model was that you have an internal category director for your key categories of spend.
Yes.
Is that so that it allows you to maintain the relationship?
That's the intimacy right there.
The relationship.
That's for the intimacy, exactly. Well, also, and we talked earlier about do we get involved, or you see the profession getting involved in things other than savings, right? And so unless I have my person there who's sitting in on the staff meetings of the chief marketing officer or the head of supply chain or a head of an e-com business unit, we're just not there, for those more strategic discussions, and we don't understand the direction that we're heading. So really understanding what we're trying to do in marketing now, moving more and more away from print and into the digital space, and what we can really start to bring some innovation, supplemented by that external
right.
resource. But I feel very, very strongly about that, and not that I won't occasionally supplement it with the outside experts, but I did actually try, because I didn't have in one category my own person. I tried the external person, and it just they had the expertise, but they didn't have the relationships. Right.
How about for companies that don't have, for smaller firms, so I'm thinking mid-market, maybe under 5 billion in revenue, they don't have the scale to invest in the expertise on a category level? Would you recommend them going still with in-house, more generalists, but still in-house people that own the relationship, and let the outsourcer do the rest? Or is there a case for the outsourcer coming in and owning that relationship with the stakeholder?
I don't know. I'm reflecting back on some of my Alex Partners work as a consultant, where we were doing private equity work, and in those cases, there's still a head of procurement. It may not be elevated to the level you'd think of as a chief procurement officer, but there's generally some head of procurement and a few people around them, and then they tend to use a fair amount of the group purchasing organizations, the consortia and the like, for some of their purchases, and and then I suppose there's probably a role for some outsourcers there, but I still wouldn't advise a 100% outsource. I think you still need that cadre of small number of people internal. They're not category experts now; they're just relationship sort of experts.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, for a relationship or a program like that to work, it's all about change and helping to manage change. And I've seen relationships, just in my experience, where you have an organization who's committed to that and understands that they have a role to play. And then I've worked with organizations who don't and want to kind of wash their hands of procurement and leave it on the outsourcer and say that's your contract. You told me you were going to save all this money. Where is it?
Right.
And if you do kind of wash your hands of it, then you will never, in my opinion at least, achieve kind of maximize the potential of an outsourced program.
I think so.
When you looked at hiring Proxima, what were you taking into account? What were you looking for in a partner? What should people look for when they're looking for an outsourcing partner?
Well, I think it started with just a discovery process of looking at the model, because I had probably 5 or 6 different players come on board, and so I just wanted to think through, what is the typical model, and then how flexible are they, and do they. If you think about the range of services, are they providing services all the way from the inception of a sourcing program all the way through even some provide transactional sorts of engines, and so I was actually looking kind of in parallel at P2P systems as well, and decided to kind of unbundle. I guess that was the first thing. Right. Kind of decide to unbundle that. I guess the second, kind of back to this, the notion of the hybrid, there were a few that sort of offered to kind of take the whole thing off my hands, so to speak, and I wasn't interested in that, and they didn't seem to have a mindset or a commercial model that fit that. There were, 1 or 2 who looked upon procurement not as a deep specialty, in and of itself, but did a lot of other BPO, and so they, would kind of tack this on to that. And I came down to Proxima because they were willing to be very flexible in how we built up the model, not just to start with, but I knew it wouldn't work right to begin with. I knew that we would have to iterate this model, and they were very flexible commercially as well, and that they could see my long-term vision and knew they would be part of the long-term if they only helped me deliver this. And so I just felt at the end of the day, and my team did, that they would be most flexible and most able to help us.
How important was cultural fit?
Well, yes. Do I enjoy going out and having a pint with them? is sort of the simple test. But we do have an occasional few pints, and we do a lot of creative thinking over those, and that I think that's very important.
What are some of the lessons that you've learned, or some of the critical success factors when you think about implementing an outsourced procurement program? And it can be a spot program where it's just using one point solution, or it can be something broader than that. But what are some of the things that you would encourage others to think about as they embark on a journey like you've been on? Right.
Well, I think the first thing is be very clear what you're asking of them, because they're only going to do what you've asked them to do, and usually what you're thinking that they should be doing is different than exactly what you wrote in the contract. And they can't be all things to all people. So I think you have to be very clear. Am I looking, when I have a pipeline of projects, am I looking to carve off a few of those projects and just give those to the outsourcer and they run it kind of soup to nuts, or am I looking for them to provide support to my category managers across the whole spectrum, but the category managers still own all of that? We had to sort through a few of those things. And I think also I always have to be mindful that I'm selling. I mean, I sell. Right. That's half of my job is to sell every day to executives and to sell to my own team. And I realized a few months into the outsourcing that sort of I was convinced, but my directors and everybody else weren't. Right. And I actually had to sort of force the use of the outsource partners for I would say probably a good 6 or 9 months.
Interesting.
Until even my directors were believers, because you will struggle. when you first start up. So you have to have the vision that it's going to work. You have to have the trusted partner who you can sit down over that pint of beer at night and figure out what do we do differently, and who are willing to maybe even overinvest with you until you get it going. And now, we couldn't do without them, and my directors would yell and scream if I didn't have that support. But you do have to have that vision, and it's sort of an intangible that you have to have with them that you couldn't really write in a contract.
Is that skepticism from, you mentioned your directors, is it just a fear of the unknown, or?
I think it's the unknown, and it's they've grown up, in a different world, a traditional sort of model. And I hired a new director in one area, and he's sort of used to a certain model, and he says, "Oh, well, thank you, I don't need your help, Mr. Outsourcer." And I'm saying, well, I don't care if you need his help or not. Yes, this is the model that we're going to use. Or he says, "Oh, I think I'd like to hire my own person to do this work that we're giving to them." So, well, you might like to, but no, we're not going to do that because there's a kind of a bigger picture here.
And do you see this model, this delivery model that uses third parties like outsourcing, is it going to grow? Are we ultimately as a profession going to move more in that direction, or is it just situational based on individual company needs?
I personally think it's going to continue to grow, but I don't think at anywhere near the rates that some of the big firms initially
you see like 20-25%
expected.
Compound annual growth rates, and you don't really see that in the industry.
I don't see that. I mean, it's the same way that sourcing projects were huge in the early days when I was in the business. I mean, it wasn't unusual to have a sourcing project, over $10 million and 25 consultants on it, and the projects now are very they're smaller and pointed, I guess. So I think that the outsourcers need to find easier on-ramps to their services, whether that be point solutions in along the sourcing process, or probably more likely point solutions in categories.
Yeah, I often wonder if, I think that it's still an evolution of the services that are being provided. It's like we went from being e-sources, consultants, catalogs, into more consulting and then longer term engagements, and now it's kind of going to the next step of smaller engagements and a lot more agile. You're not necessarily getting the deals today that you were, 5 years ago, where it's across all categories, move everything. I think people are being a little bit more thoughtful about how they use outsourcing.
Well, I think that's right, and they might take a category that's very gnarly because it's across 1,000 different retail sites or something, and I don't have the data, and I actually think having been at the Coupa conference for the last couple of days and looking at the evolution of spend management and thinking about the data and the analytics that start to come out of solutions like a Coupa, I think the smart outsourcer would start to think about that and think about how you take sort of the outputs from a system like a Coupa, both in terms of data that start to suggest where there are hidden opportunities, as well as maybe carving off, small tail spends and thinking about how you do spot buys and the like. I just think the smart outsourcer figures out how to integrate into that world.
I've talked a little bit with a couple of guests that I interviewed about kind of a two-tier procurement in the future, where you have part of it, which is the tactical, transactional, administrative, being outsourced, ultimately maybe automated. And then the rest is where we're really creating a difference for our stakeholders. Do you see that's the way that we're going to evolve? Or?
Well, I do think the transactional piece is totally separate. As we've been talking about outsourcing, I've actually been thinking about the more strategic piece of that. So the transactional piece, yes. I mean, I think you either automate that away to a large extent, or you do outsource it. And I actually do have a different outsource partner that helps a bit on the transactional side that I actually didn't even think about as we were going through the discussion, because it's not that critical. Though, back to, the Coupas of the world and getting more sophisticated around spend management, you think, well, maybe there's actually more value in that transactional side than historically there's been. It's more now than just efficiently process those purchase requests and orders and invoices, but it's...
As you start seeing the data that's coming out of that, then you can do different things with it.
Exactly. So that just makes me think, maybe it's not a good idea to split those two anymore, and maybe the outsourcer should think about having a solution for both
that
of
integrates
those.
both.
Right.
So my last question really on outsourcing, and this goes back to, you mentioned about having to convince your directors of the value that, given that they were skeptical. If there's a procurement professional out there who works for a company that they have outsourced or they're thinking about outsourcing, how should they think about it? How would you recommend they think about this and make it a positive rather than be negatively impacted by an outsourcer coming on board?
Oh, you mean if there's an individual in a procurement group and that individual is going to be outsourced?
Well, no, if they're, so your directors, for example,
right.
You've got two choices. You can either understand that the change is coming and be a part of it, or you can put your head in the sand and think, I'm going to lose my job because of this, and then because of the actions you take, maybe that is actually what happens. It's kind of self-fulfilling in a way. So I'm interested how you would encourage your team to actually recognize this as an opportunity and something to take advantage of, because people in that same situation can then apply that thinking to their own positions rather than have it impact them in a negative way.
Right. Well, I like to get people to think of procurement as a profession and themselves as individuals within that profession, and I want them to increase their skill set and their tool set so that they're more valuable to me in procurement. They're more valuable perhaps in another role eventually within Staples or even outside Staples if they find a role there. And so to have a well-rounded skill set in procurement, you really need access to things other than what you see within the four walls of procurement. And I've had the privilege, really, having been in a couple different consulting and outsourcing firms as first a young consultant and then a partner. I've probably been in 50 different companies if I were to count them, and led numerous procurement transformation programs. Most of the people who work for me haven't, and they've seen maybe two companies, maybe three companies, at most. And so to the degree that we can bring an outsource partner on board who has that similar exposure to many other companies, and they can work with those outsourcers and learn more about the category or learn more about the profession, that does nothing more than enhance their skill set. And that's job security in my mind, not keeping everything out and just doing the same thing the same way I've been doing it.
Well, I have, as we're coming to time to wrap up, I just have a final question that's more related to a procurement career perspective. So, obviously you've done a lot of hiring, you see a lot of people in the procurement space, interact with a lot of people who are seeking to grow their careers and ultimately step up to being a CPO or a senior leader in the field. I was interested that from your experience, what have you seen the people who are most successful do to kind of stand out from their peers and stand out from the crowd?
Yes, I think that beyond delivering savings, of course, that's sort of the fundamental. I think that the ones that can step outside the boundaries a bit and explore either new areas of business where we hadn't worked before. So, for example, with us, just a small example, we have a promotional products business. We're actually pretty big on like the thing you've got hanging around your neck there. We're one of the largest companies in that space, but it operates as a bit of an independent company. And somebody on the team, a fairly young person on the team, actually took the initiative to go work with that group and developed actually not just purchasing recommendations, but looked at their whole purchasing process and a number of other things, and came back with some good savings and some good innovation. And now we have the door open with those folks. That sort of puts them on the map. And then I think that developing the stakeholder relationships. I mean, if I think about some of the real stars in the group, I'm always getting notes about those people from the stakeholders, about how well they listened, how well they took their requirements in consideration, how well they teamed through the process. So I think those would be the key things. Yeah.
Great. Well, Mike, I just want to thank you again for participating today and for joining me on the show. I am going to put show notes from today's episode, so just a summary of the learnings and a couple of links I'll link up to your LinkedIn profile as well. Sure. And those will be at artofprocurement.com/Mike Jacobs. That's artofprocurement.com/Mike Jacobs. So, Mike, thank you very much.
Very welcome. Enjoyed it.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.